If there were a way to detect AI writing, a foolproof way, you'd want to know about it, right? AI-generated images, videos, articles, social media posts, and even voices are rapidly taking up space in our media, space that was once occupied almost exclusively by material created by actual humans. And one of the dangers of this is that it's getting harder and harder to detect what's AI and what's real. Even scarier is that even though generative AI tools have been available to the masses for a relatively short period of time, studies are already emerging, showing that use of generative AI is contributing to a decline in critical thinking and cognitive abilities. A lot of theories have started to emerge about so-called proof of use of AI in writing, but they're not all necessarily real. So let's dig into these theories, and let's start by addressing the one I've seen popping up with increasing frequency lately, the concept of the ChatGPT hyphen.
The alphabet has only 26 letters. With these 26 magic symbols, however, millions of words are written every day.
I'm a certified copy editor. I speak another language fluently, and I have years of English language teaching experience and translation experience. Through my qualifications and career, I've also come to know a thing or two about dashes. English has 3 of them, and none are called the ChatGPT hyphen. One of the most popular theories about how to detect AI writing is by looking for what many people online are now referring to as the ChatGPT hyphen. I use this mark in the very first line of the script for this video. The actual name for this mark is an M dash. It's the largest of the 3 dashes of English. Primarily, we use it to drop information into a sentence, like I did with the intro at the beginning. Here's the intro with the script on the screen so you can see. If there were a way to detect AI writing, a foolproof way, you'd want to know about it, right? See how it separated a foolproof way from the rest of the sentence? When you want to drop a tidbit of information into an existing full sentence, you can do that with an M dash. It's also very commonly used to show an abrupt stop in speech, like when someone is surprised or when they're interrupted. You'll see this a lot in books and other materials that feature dialogue between characters. Increasingly, this mark, the M dash, is the mark that people claim is indicative of AI use. It's a solid theory for a few reasons. 1, there is no M dash button on most keyboards. If you want to type an M dash on your phone, it takes a bit of extra hunting for it. To use it on a computer, you need to know a certain pattern of buttons to push, and most people don't want to do this. 2, many people never even learn what an M dash is in school. We focus primarily on the most common punctuation marks, like periods, question marks, commas, parentheses, and so on. 3, if there are other marks that can perform roughly the same function in the sentence, why not just use those instead? And 4, lots of people will just toss a different dash into their sentence instead because they don't know that the different dashes have distinct uses. So let's take a moment to break them all down and then examine why the ChatGPT hyphen isn't necessarily a foolproof way of catching AI use. Remember how I told you earlier that there are 3 dashes in English? We've been talking about the longest one, the M dash. It's called the M dash because it's the width of the letter M in the font you're typing in. The next one, the middle length dash, is called the N dash. It's the size of the letter N in the font you're typing in. This one has a variety of uses, but some of the key uses are to show ranges, like between years or between times. And lastly, we have the hyphen, the shortest dash. This is the one we use to connect compound words, like know-it-all or show-off. These dashes have a lot of uses, but these are arguably the most common.
So how do these rules relate to detecting AI?
Certain professions are responsible for knowing these dashes, and lots of those people have been editing books, articles, and newspapers for decades. Part of their job is to know the rules and when to apply them, and there are tons more rules that apply to language and how it's written. These rules are listed in something called style guides. Top media outlets use them, and they help us to make sure everyone prepares books, academic papers, news articles, and other forms of written communication in a standard way. It's a pretty wonderful system because it means we, the regular people reading those things, benefit from having a standard system. If every publication got to do whatever it wanted with commas or dashes or capital letters, it would make for a very confusing media experience. And you know who loves standardization and rules? Computers.
Computers have been called machines for logic. The human problem solver must first define the problem, He must also provide the machine with instructions as to the steps necessary to solve the problem.
These standardized methods of preparing written material have made it much easier for AI training. With millions of articles out there on the web to use as reference material, AI tools have learned standard ways of writing, and this includes things like the em dash, which previously wasn't used much in person-to-person communication. It appeared largely in books, news articles, academia, and other professional materials. So it makes sense that so many people today, especially young people, who get their news from TikTok, Instagram, and other TV and video sources would be unfamiliar with the em dash and start to associate it with generative AI use. And to be honest, I can't say that it's not a sign of ChatGPT use. While I know that I personally use the em dash in my regular writing, I know that's not true for everyone. And this is where it becomes essential that you use a bit of your personal judgment. If the writer you're reading has text that includes em dashes, but you've never seen that person use one before, there's a non-zero chance they've gotten some help from an AI tool. But there are a few other hints you can use to help you make the determination, and they do require a pretty keen eye. At the end of this video, we'll talk about the most subtle kinds of things you can look for. But for now, let's take a look at some of the flags that are a little easier to spot. The next big one is formatting. Perhaps you've noticed that ChatGPT and other AI tools have learned, likely from the same sources we talked about a moment ago, that people have an easier time digesting information when it's formatted with a big title, a short subheading, and lots of easy to digest bullet points. Studies have shown that including headings in text improves comprehension, and including headings can even increase learners' tendency to monitor their own comprehension level as they read through the material. Headings and bullet points are much less intimidating than a wall of text. It's easier to read, and the key points can be made succinctly. Also, frankly, attention spans are plummeting, and people want information as fast as possible. When an AI tool outputs a solution to a problem, for example, it'll often follow this format in its answers. Here's a bonus way to spot potential AI use. It'll also often use an emoji at the beginning of the heading, sometimes in a humorous way, sometimes in a way that ties into the subject matter, or sometimes as a way to emphasize a certain point. I believe the reason for this is also related to comprehension. There are studies that show use of emoji can increase comprehension of the material. Let's take a step into the more subtle ways of detecting generative AI. Vocabulary choices. This hint, of course, requires that you already have some kind of understanding of the person's typical vocabulary, regular writing patterns, and even personality. For example, if your 13-year-old child brings you an essay on tariffs and their economic impacts, but the text is full of vocabulary that only finance writers and economists would use, it's suspicious. If someone learning your language suddenly begins writing perfect messages to you that include vocabulary words and grammar you've never heard them use fluently before, that might be an indicator. This gets more difficult with writing produced by adults and next to impossible when reading from an anonymous writer online. And it's here we really need to get cautious. If you're ever not sure, you could try asking the person some questions related to the content of their writing and see what they say.
Many people are attempting to use computers to replace man. I am much more interested myself in using man and machines as a working combination.
While tools have emerged that claim to be able to detect AI writing, they're not the best. There are already tons of stories about original student papers being falsely flagged as AI. And the reverse is also true. Stories about students whose AI-written papers passed these AI detector tests. Articles from a few years ago detailing this problem suggested implementing a kind of watermark in generative AI tools, so that even if a person copied and pasted text from ChatGPT or similar, there would still be a tiny bit of traceable information within that content that would indicate it had been generated by AI. But the problem is that even if AI detector tools implement the ability to identify these watermarks, there are so many generative AI programs out there now that are evolving so rapidly that the detection systems wouldn't be able to keep up. In other words, the generative AI tools and the people making them would be so good at learning how to evade detection that they'd constantly be one step ahead of the detector tools. This means that school instructors are now faced with difficult decisions regarding AI use in classes, homework, and examinations. It's totally changing educational approaches. This is really a topic for another video, though. The last tips for this video are extremely subtle and require nuanced examination. A tone of writing that feels overly polished and structured might be an indicator of AI use. A tendency to rely on the same vocabulary words over and over might be a sign. Writing that lacks emotion or depth could be another indicator. Writing with excessive amounts of praise, telling the writer how smart they are, for example, is yet another possible indicator. While it's impossible to know with 100% certainty whether something was written with AI, we can at least learn some of the signs these generative tools tend to display, at least at this point in time. It'll only get better from here. People have started discussing the phrases and grammar patterns they feel are indicators of AI, just like the ChatGPT hyphen we talked about earlier. Some examples of these phrases are rest assured, or the grammar pattern not just X, but Y. Another fun one is an answer that starts with a weird regurgitation of the prompt itself. This technology has incredible uses, but it's also bringing about incredible changes in education and communication. Rather than try to shut down all AI use, I think it's essential we think critically about the role of AI and how best to work with it, with the assumption that the people around us are also going to use it. This video is just one small part of a broad and extremely important conversation happening around AI, language, and communication right now. If you have any other tips for detecting AI-generated writing, please add them to the comments so we can discuss. Hope you enjoyed the video and see you next time.